She called him a threat to democracy. He called her a threat to humanity, and then he went even further. Standing behind the podium lit by the stage lights of a late spring rally in Pennsylvania, Donald J. Trump did something no American president has ever done. He looked dead into the camera and said calmly, "There are people who hate this country so much. Maybe they don't deserve to be citizens anymore." The crowd erupted, cheers, applause, but online the firestorm began. The moment that line hit the airwaves, Rosie O'Donnell's name surged to the top of every trending list. "Trump threatens to revoke Rosie's citizenship," they screamed. CNN cut to a constitutional emergency panel. MSNBC's Joy Reid declared, "This is fascism in real time." And Rosie, she tweeted back instantly, "Bring it on, orange monster." "I'm not afraid of cowards." I'll be honest with you, when I first saw the clip, I paused. Not because I was surprised Trump said it, but because of how quiet he was when he did. That silence. It was scarier than a shout. See, we've all seen the loud Trump, the firebrand, the insult comic in a suit. But this moment wasn't that. This wasn't reality TV. This was a man standing on the most powerful stage in the world, speaking like the Constitution had just gotten personal. And here's the part that hit hardest. He wasn't angry, he wasn't joking, he meant it. And if you know anything about Trump, you know he doesn't bluff. Across the country, the media framed it as another Trump tantrum. Another day, another controversy. But those of us who were really listening, we knew something had shifted. Because Trump wasn't just throwing punches at Rosie. He was drawing a line in the sand between those who love this country and those who mock it on stage, on TV, on Twitter. I've seen that line before. It shows up at every veteran's funeral I've attended. It shows up in the eyes of a coal miner who's just lost his job but still raises the flag outside his trailer. It shows up in churches, in diners and pickup trucks driving down county roads, places the elite never visit but love to criticize. And Rosie, she became the face of that mockery. She joked that Trump had tiny hands. She called him mentally ill. She said his voters were scared white people clinging to their Bibles. And through it all, Trump didn't just respond. He remembered. So when he finally said we might as well revoke their citizenship, he wasn't just talking about Rosie. He was talking about something deeper, a sense of betrayal. Betrayal from the Hollywood class that uses freedom to spit on the flag. From media anchors who laugh while flyover states mourn. From elites who dine on coastal wine while mocking the farmers who grow their food. This moment wasn't about Rosie O'Donnell. It was about us. It was about every American who's ever felt invisible in their own country, who's been told their values are outdated, who's watched their kids come home from college ashamed of the flag they were raised under. And in that one sentence, Trump spoke for them. Maybe you disagree with how he said it. Maybe you think it went too far. But I'll tell you this, for millions of Americans, that moment wasn't frightening. It was clarifying, because it asked the question we've all been too afraid to say out loud. What happens when loving your country becomes a punchline? And more importantly, what do you do when the people who hate this country hold the microphone? You know what's strange? For a man who built his reputation on being loud, Donald Trump spent years in a kind of forced silence. Not literally, of course. He still had his rallies, his press conferences, his roaring crowds. But in the court of cultural power, Hollywood academia, the media, he wasn't just outnumbered. He was exiled. And leading the charge against him, loudest of them all, was Rosie O'Donnell. It didn't start in politics. It started with jokes. Back in 2006, Rosie took aim at Trump on national television, mocked his business record, his hair, his marriage. Day after day, punchline after punchline, she turned him into a cartoon villain. Not a person, not a man, a meme, a monster, a joke. Trump responded in typical Trump fashion, called her names, pushed back hard. But it didn't matter, because in the public square, where moral points are handed out by late-night comedians and Instagram influencers, Rosie was wearing the crown. She wasn't just roasting Trump, she was scoring touchdowns. And what did the media do? They gave her the ball again and again and again. Let me tell you something personal. I remember watching a clip of Rosie from a late-night show in 2017. She was holding up a doll of Trump and yelling, "This is the face of fascism." The crowd roared, the host grinned, and I remember thinking, is this what we've become? We used to debate ideas. Now we mock people's faces. The truth is, Trump was powerless to stop it. Yes, he had the presidency, but Rosie had something more dangerous: cultural immunity. She could say anything, do anything, and millions would cheer. Imagine being the President of the United States and still watching your wife and son get insulted by talk show panels. Imagine waking up every day to headlines that twist your every word while your critics get standing ovations for jokes about your death. That kind of pressure doesn't come with bruises. It comes with slow erosion of dignity, of humanity, of patience. And through it all, Trump stood on stage, smiling, pointing, tossing red hats. But deep down, there had to be something boiling. And I think that's what makes this story different. Because this wasn't just about politics. This was personal. Rosie O'Donnell didn't just criticize Trump's policies. She insulted his marriage. She joked about his mental health. She mocked his supporters, the very people he swore to represent. And for every insult she threw, there were thousands more from Twitter, from headlines, from celebrities lining up to get their turn. Now, think about that. You're sitting at home. You voted for a man who promised to fight for you, the working man, the forgotten woman, the family struggling to pay bills while elites sip cocktails at $10,000 fundraisers. And every time you turn on the news, you see people like Rosie laughing at him, which means they're laughing at you. It wears you down. It makes you feel invisible. I know folks like that. My cousin in Kansas, Vietnam vet, union guy. He told me once, I don't even care what Trump tweets. I just like that he punches back. Because to him, and to millions like him, Trump wasn't just a candidate. He was a proxy, a vessel, a shield. Every insult Rosie threw at Trump felt like an insult to his faith, his flag, his father's hard work. But what made it worse was how long it lasted. This wasn't a moment. This was a campaign, 15 years of ridicule. And Trump couldn't stop it. Not with laws, not with speeches, not even with power. That's what made his line at that rally so shocking. It didn't come from nowhere. It came from a place most Americans know all too well. When you've taken hits for so long, you stop swinging wildly. You start aiming. And in that moment when Trump said Rosie might not deserve her citizenship, he wasn't talking like a politician. He was talking like a man who'd reached the end of the hallway we've all walked down, where you try to stay civil, where you turn the other cheek, where you say let it go. Be the bigger person until you reach that door, and behind it is the last straw. That was the look in his eyes. Not rage, but resolve. Because maybe, just maybe, Trump realized what so many of us have been feeling for years, that in modern America, if you love this country out loud, you're the enemy. And if you mock it on stage, you get a standing ovation. There's a kind of power that isn't tied to office or title. It's the power to shape a narrative, to decide who gets mocked and who gets mercy. And for more than a decade, Rosie O'Donnell held that kind of power. It didn't matter what she said, because she said it with a smile. It didn't matter who she insulted, because she did it in front of an applauding audience. That's the power of the American culture machine. It turns cruelty into comedy as long as it's pointed in the right direction, boy. And for the elites, Trump was always the right direction. The thing is, they never expected him to last this long. When he came down that escalator in 2015, the media laughed. When he won the GOP primary, they panicked. When he won the White House, they lost their minds. But instead of facing him with facts, they reached for ridicule. And no one did that louder than Rosie. I remember a clip from 2018. She was on a panel show wearing a pink Resist t-shirt mocking Trump's handshake, his grammar, even his weight. The host said, "You're on fire tonight." And Rosie smiled, leaned into the mic and said, "I live to roast fascists." That word fascist came easily from her lips. But do you know who heard it loudest? Not Trump, his voters. They heard her say that and thought, so that's what they think of me. Because Trump didn't invent the culture war. He exposed it. He didn't divide the country. He revealed that it was already divided between those who still believed in America's core values and those who only believed in mocking them. Every orange man bad joke, every Trump voters are dumb tweet, every late-night monologue about Jesus freaks and flyover states. All of it added up, not just to insult, but to erasure. And when people feel erased, they look for someone who can shout their name loud enough to be heard over the noise. That's who Trump became. But here's the twist. Even while holding the highest office in the land, he was still outgunned. Because cancel culture doesn't care about your office. They can kick you off platforms, censor your videos, twist your quotes, rewrite your story in real time as if truth were just a matter of timing and editing. Trump could order drone strikes, but he couldn't get a fair segment on late-night TV. And Rosie, she could tweet anything, no matter how cruel, how personal, how inaccurate, and the media would nod along. There's a quiet cruelty in that, a systemic kind of mockery, one where the laughter hurts more than the lies. I remember my dad, a carpenter in Ohio, telling me after a particularly nasty SNL skit, "I fought in Desert Storm for this country. I never thought the day would come when the people with microphones would hate it more than our enemies did." That's what this is about. Not Trump versus Rosie, but what they represent. She became the voice of the cultural elite, dripping with sarcasm, drunk on applause. And he, whether by design or by default, became the stand-in for everyone who'd ever been mocked for loving their flag too much or their God too openly. The media tried to paint Trump as the aggressor, the loudmouth, the bully, the threat. But the longer this dragged on, the clearer it became. He wasn't fighting for revenge. He was fighting to be heard. And that's the irony, isn't it? The man with the biggest platform in the world couldn't speak without being distorted. The more he tried to explain, the more they twisted. The more they twisted, the more he doubled down. And the more he doubled down, the more they said, "See, he's crazy." It was a trap, a loop, a media feedback machine designed not to inform but to inflame. And Rosie played her role perfectly. She threw stones, smiled for the cameras, then claimed victimhood when one came flying back. That's how bullies work when they've got press passes. But the people watching, they weren't stupid. They saw the imbalance. And more importantly, they felt it. Because every time Trump was mocked, so was their family, their work ethic, their church, their masculinity, their motherhood, their old pickup truck with the American flag bumper sticker. They weren't laughing. They were storing it, quietly, day by day, insult by insult. And then came that rally, that sentence, the one where Trump didn't yell, didn't rant. He just spoke. And in that moment, they didn't hear a policy. They heard payback. They heard a man finally saying out loud what they had whispered to each other in diners, church basements, barbershops, and union halls. If they hate this country so much, why are they still here? And no one, not Rosie, not CNN, not the comedy shows, had an answer ready for that. Because they never expected the silence. The crowd was ready for fire. It was CPAC, packed to the rafters, red hats, cowboy boots, folded arms, and folded flags. The air was electric, charged with months of tension. Trump had just been slammed in the press for his citizenship comment. They were waiting for him to double down, to name names, to drag Rosie O'Donnell across the stage with words sharpened like razors. But then, he didn't. He stepped up to the podium, took off his jacket, and placed it gently over the rail. He reached for the mic. He paused, and then he said something no one expected. There was once a man, he began slowly, who was told he didn't belong in his own country. The room tilted. You could feel it. A ripple through 1,000 expectations. Was this a parable? A setup to a punchline? A new line of attack? No, it was a story, a real one. Trump told the tale of a soldier unnamed who had fought overseas, returned home, and overheard a young activist say, "People like you are what's wrong with this country." The soldier didn't argue, he didn't yell. He saluted, walked away, and said to a reporter nearby, "I fought for his right to say it, but I won't apologize for earning mine." And then Trump looked up and said slowly, deliberately, That's what I meant the other night. Citizenship isn't just paperwork, it's a promise. No yelling, no Rosie, just the Constitution. And the people it was written for. That silence. It wasn't awkward, it was reverent. I've seen Trump in 100 moods, angry, defiant, roaring, sarcastic, but I've never seen him like that. Measured, controlled, still full of power but holding it like a man who knows the weight of it. Instead of mocking Rosie, he quoted Jefferson. Instead of fighting fire with fire, he brought water. I'm not revoking anything he said, voice steady. But I am reminding you freedom comes with a heart for the country that gave it to you. The camera panned the crowd, some confused, some wide-eyed, but many nodding. Slowly. Because that wasn't a punch, that was a mirror, and it made people see things differently. Trump didn't attack Rosie's looks, or her weight, or her words. He elevated the moment beyond both of them. He turned it into something moral, something sacred. And that's rare. You expect a brawler to brawl. You expect Trump to torch every bridge, every name, every critic. But instead he stood there, jacket off, voice low, and laid out a vision of citizenship that had nothing to do with passports and everything to do with purpose. And I have to admit, I was stunned, not because he was calm, but because he was right. We throw around the word citizen like it's automatic. You're born here, congrats, you're in. You fill out the form, you pass the test. Welcome. But when did we stop asking the deeper question? Do you love the place you live? Because Rosie and others like her have spent years making America the punchline of their fame. Trump wasn't calling for punishment. He was calling for remembrance. And that landed harder than any insult ever could. It was a reminder, wrapped in restraint. And I believe moments like that, unexpected, unscripted, un-Trump-like, are what shake the story loose. They make you look twice. They make you feel something that no headline can explain. Because here's the truth. Sometimes silence says more than shouting ever could. You could hear the silence, not just in the room but across the airwaves. The usual anchors, the snarky panelists, the Saturday Night Live writers. They didn't know what to do with this version of Trump. He hadn't yelled, he hadn't insulted, he hadn't ranted or raved or roared. He'd just paused. And in that pause, something strange happened. The story began to crack. Not for everyone. Of course not. Rosie O'Donnell tweeted the next morning that fascist thinks quoting Jefferson makes him deep. He's still a coward. But even that tweet felt hollow, because something had changed. See, when Trump lashes out, the script is easy to follow. The left calls him dangerous. The right cheers him on. The middle tunes out. But when he shows control, when he uses history instead of heat, when he speaks like a man carrying a weight, not swinging a club, people listen. Not the pundits, not the entertainers, but the people who still remember sitting in civics class and feeling a lump in their throat when they read the Constitution for the first time. People like a retired Marine named John in Florida. He wrote a letter to a local paper after the CPAC speech. Said, I didn't vote for Trump the first time. I didn't like his mouth. But after last night, I heard something I hadn't heard in years, a president reminding us we're citizens before we're consumers. That letter went viral, and it wasn't alone. Across small towns and big churches and fire halls and veterans' homes, people started talking again. Not about Rosie, not about revenge, about what it means to belong. That's the twist here. This story, which started as another insult match, turned into something sacred. A reawakening, the kind you don't see coming. The kind that doesn't need hashtags or headlines. Just a sentence. And a man who for once let the sentence stand on its own. Now I know what some people are thinking. They'll say it was calculated. A pivot. A press strategy. Maybe. But sometimes the effect matters more than the motive. Because what I saw, what many of us saw, was a man choosing a different weapon. Not a tweet, not a jab. A memory. Of a soldier. Of a story. Of a country that once believed in more than applause. And it worked. I spoke to a pastor in West Virginia the week after the speech. He told me he played the clip in front of his congregation. Not the fire and fury Trump, but the quiet one. The constitutional one. He said for the first time in a long time, people didn't just cheer. They wept. Because deep down we all know This isn't about Trump or Rosie or politics. It's about tone. It's about trust. It's about the kind of leadership that doesn't entertain, but elevates. And that's what caught everyone off guard. The left expected rage. The right expected retaliation. What they got was reflection. A rare moment of moral clarity in a culture addicted to chaos. And here's the thing, people remember that. They remember how it felt to sit in that crowd and not be whipped into a chant, but invited into a conversation. They remember that Trump didn't flinch, didn't blink, just told a story, and let the silence do the shouting. That's not weakness. That's strategy. That's story. That's something older than all of this. Because every once in a while, whether by accident or divine design, a leader does something that reminds us who we are. Not Republicans, not Democrats. Americans. And if that scares the people who profit from division, good. Because it should. He waited until the applause died down. The crowd at CPAC had just finished standing for the second time in 10 minutes, not for volume, but for silence, for restraint, for something they hadn't expected moral authority. Trump leaned into the mic. "Let me be clear," he said. "You don't have to like me. That's fine. Free country." Pause. "But if you hate this country, if you mock everything it stands for, every family that built it, every soldier who died for it, don't be surprised when people ask why you still want to be here." Boom! No screaming, no cursing. Just a clean shot through the center of the room. You could feel it in the posture of the people sitting up straighter. In the quiet murmurs that weren't really murmurs, they were people saying to themselves, "He said it." And then it happened. A reporter from CNN stood up from the press section, young, polished, smug, and shouted, "Mr. President, are you saying Rosie O'Donnell should be deported?" Trump turned his head slowly. Didn't break eye contact. "I'm saying that freedom without love becomes license. And this country wasn't built on license, it was built on sacrifice." The room froze. It wasn't a soundbite, it was a sword. And the way he said it, low, steady, final, made you feel like he wasn't talking about Rosie anymore. He was talking about every late-night host who mocked blue-collar dads with calloused hands, every Ivy League panel that rolled its eyes at Bible verses, every Hollywood award show that laughed harder at Trump jokes than they did at child sex trafficking charges against their own. This wasn't political theater. It was a reckoning. And Trump? He wasn't dodging it. He was delivering it calmly, confidently, like a man whose name had been mocked in every zip code and no longer cared. "You want to talk about a moment." That was it. That's when something broke in the room. Because right after he spoke, an older man in the back stood up, graybeard, trucker hat, Vietnam jacket, and said loud enough for the cameras to pick it up. "My son died in Afghanistan." She called him a pawn. "You, sir, you speak for me." And then he sat down, and the silence that followed, thicker than a Southern sermon. The reporter didn't respond. No one did. Even Rosie, live-tweeting the speech from her home in New York, paused for 7 full minutes before posting a shaky retort, "Fake veteran." Trump probably paid him. That tweet didn't land. In fact, it boomeranged. By morning, the vet had a name, Gerald McKinley. Decorated, documented. His son Aaron had been killed by an IED in Helmand Province in 2010. And Rosie She deleted the tweet. But the damage was done not to Trump, to her. Because for the first time in this long, ugly feud, the mask slipped. People saw not just a comedian lashing out, but a woman panicking. Why? Because Trump hadn't hit her with an insult. He hit her with the truth. And the truth doesn't care how loud your microphone is. I don't know about you, but I stood up out of my chair when I heard that vet speak. Not because it was dramatic, but because it was honest. And in an age where everything feels like spin, and theater honesty hits like thunder, that's why this moment mattered. Not because Trump won a debate, but because he stopped playing the game. And the moment he did, everyone else started scrambling for the script. By the next morning, you could feel the ground shifting. It didn't happen on cable news. It didn't happen in White House press briefings. It happened in quieter places. Church pews, barbershops, truck stops with old wooden counters, and coffee that's been burning since 5 a.m. People were talking again. Not yelling, talking. The clip of Trump and Gerald McKinley, the father of the fallen soldier, had gone viral. But it wasn't the kind of viral that ends with a meme. This one landed in the chest. And not just for conservatives. Even some who'd spent years rolling their eyes at MAGA hats paused and leaned in. Because whether you loved Trump or loathed him, you knew what you saw was real. It wasn't the theater of politics. It was the ache of memory, of sacrifice, of a father who lost his son and found his voice. People don't forget moments like that, especially not when they cut through the noise. Rosie O'Donnell had built her platform on sarcasm, on shock, on being louder than anyone in the room. But now the room wasn't clapping. Because here's the truth most elites never see. When you mock America long enough, eventually America listens. And then America speaks. Not through hashtags or headlines, but through veterans, through farmers, through mothers holding folded flags, through small towns where the silence after a funeral is louder than any applause. This wasn't about Trump, not anymore. It was about something deeper, older, sacred. Respect. Respect for a country that, yes, has flaws, but also has graves full of men and women who gave their last breath so people like Rosie could still have the right to run her mouth. And that's the difference. Trump reminded us of that. Not with a threat, not with a tantrum, but with a question. What do we owe the country that gave us everything? That question doesn't show up on Twitter trends. It doesn't sell ad space on late-night comedy. But it echoes in places where truth still matters. I saw a clip from a town hall in Michigan the day after the speech. A woman teacher, mid-50s, no campaign stickers on her car, stood up and said, "I didn't vote for Trump. I never thought I would. But what he said last night, that was about me. Because I teach kids who roll their eyes when we say the pledge, and no one tells them why it matters." She was crying by the end of it, and she wasn't alone. Because something had broken open, a crack in the cynicism, a sliver of light. For years, Trump had been painted as the villain, loud, crude, divisive, but now he was holding the moral ground, and the people who used to sneer, they didn't know what to do with it. I read a blog post that week by a moderate Democrat in Vermont. He wrote, "I never thought I'd say this, but Trump was right. We've made hate fashionable as long as it wears the right colors." That's what Rosie never understood. Sarcasm can win laughs, but it can't win hearts. And in that CPAC speech, Trump didn't reach for a punchline. He reached for something higher, and people followed. They didn't chant, they didn't march, they just remembered. What it feels like to stand in a room where the flag actually means something, where sacrifice is sacred, where restraint is strength. And just like that, the story flipped. Trump wasn't the threat, he was the mirror, and the people who'd been mocking him for years didn't like what they saw. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to, because by now the crowd wasn't waiting for a punch. They were waiting for permission, to feel again, to believe again, and Trump gave it to them. "I'm not asking you to hate anyone," he said. "That's not what America's built on." He let that hang, longer than usual, long enough to make people shift in their seats. Reflect. "I'm asking you to love this country more than they hate it." There it was, the pivot. The punchline turned prayer, and it hit different. Because we've all seen him fire up a stadium. We've seen the rally chants, the MAGA crescendos, the jabs and laughs. But this was quieter, softer, stronger. The kind of strength that doesn't need a spotlight. The kind of strength you find in a widow's voice at a military funeral. Or a farmer's handshake after a storm takes down his barn, but not his faith. The kind that makes people cry, not from sadness, but from recognition. Because somewhere inside, they'd been waiting to hear it. That love of country isn't rage, it's resolve. And as Trump said that line, "Love this country more than they hate it," something happened. People started standing. Not all at once, not like a cheer, but slowly. One by one. Like it meant something. Like they were agreeing, not with him, but with themselves. And that's when the moment crystallized. A woman in the third row, mid-60s, silver hair, blue denim jacket with an eagle pin raised her hand. Trump noticed. She didn't shout. She didn't plead. She simply asked, voice trembling, "Do you think it's too late?" That silence. It was deeper than politics. Deeper than any speech he'd ever given. He looked at her. Paused. Then said, "Ma'am, it's never too late to remember who we are." 8 words. That's all. But they rang louder than 1,000 campaign slogans. And you know what? That woman sat down, wiped her eyes, and placed her hand over her heart. And the rest of the room followed. Not because Trump told them to, not because of cameras, but because in that moment America, not the politics, not the parties, but the idea of America, felt real again. The press didn't know what to do with it. CNN called it emotional manipulation. MSNBC labeled it coded nationalism. The Washington Post printed a headline that read, "Trump weaponizes patriotism." But outside that bubble, people weren't analyzing. They were feeling. A sheriff in Arizona emailed his deputies the clip. A high school principal in Ohio played it at morning announcements. A veteran's home in Texas replayed it every night for a week. Because it wasn't a campaign moment. It was a correction. And it reminded people what politics is supposed to serve. Not egos, not clicks, not headlines, but home. That's what Trump got right in that moment. He made the room smaller. He made the story human again. And Rosie, she tried to fight back, posted a tearful video, said she was being erased, claimed the veteran was planted, accused Trump of emotional warfare. But the damage wasn't in the facts. It was in the feeling, and that can't be undone. Because when you finally say the thing everyone else is afraid to say, you don't just win the moment, you shift the ground it stands on. And that day Trump didn't just speak, he shifted something. In them, in us, in the room, long after the crowd filed out. After the lights dimmed, the hats were packed, and the stage crew began folding chairs. That moment still lingered. Not like a headline, like a hum, something beneath the surface, something deeper than applause. A woman in Tennessee told her pastor that night, "I didn't feel like I was watching a campaign. I felt like I was remembering something I forgot." That's the power of stillness. That's the power of words, spoken without shouting. And for once, just once, Trump didn't try to dominate the moment. He honored it. He didn't fight. He reminded. Didn't provoke. He invited. And in doing so, he did something rare in American politics. He gave people their dignity back. That's what Rosie never understood. That's what most in media still don't. This fight was never about Trump's ego. It was about America's memory. The memory of what it used to mean to be a citizen. To belong to something bigger than yourself. To owe your country not just loyalty but gratitude. Because somewhere along the way, we stopped saying thank you. To our flag, to our soldiers, to our teachers who still say the pledge with trembling voices. To our parents who worked double shifts just so we could sit in a classroom where freedom was more than a word. Trump didn't need to teach us that. He just reminded us. And that's the moral center of this story. Not that Trump won, but that we remembered who we are. There's a line I heard once from an old Navy chaplain. He said, "When a man forgets his past, he doesn't become free, he becomes unanchored." And that's what we've been. Unanchored. Drifting between outrage and irony, between tweets and tantrums, between a culture that celebrates mockery and a people starving for meaning. Trump threw down an anchor, and for one quiet moment the drift stopped. That's what Gerald McKinley felt when he stood up. That's what that woman with the eagle pin felt when she placed her hand on her heart. It wasn't about Trump. It was about truth, a truth too many have been afraid to say out loud. That loving your country doesn't make you a threat. It makes you whole. It makes you part of something worth defending, not just with weapons, but with words. And when Trump said, "Love this country more than they hate it," he wasn't giving a command. He was offering a choice. And maybe, just maybe, enough people are ready to choose it again. I'll never forget the look in that woman's eyes. She wasn't clapping. She wasn't crying. She was remembering. And that's what made it powerful. Not the speech, not the crowd, but the stillness that came after. It reminded me of my grandfather, a World War II vet. He never talked much about the war, But every year on Veterans Day, he'd sit at the kitchen table with his old hat, sip his coffee, and say the same thing. This country's made mistakes, but I've never seen one better. That's what we've lost. Not patriotism, but perspective. Rosie O'Donnell doesn't get that. To her, America is a platform, a joke, a product to be punched. But for people like my grandfather, for men like Gerald McKinley, for women like that teacher in Michigan who stood up and asked, "Is it too late?" America isn't a punchline. It's a promise. And Trump, for all his flaws, all his noise, all his battles, did something rare that night. He reminded people of the promise. He didn't pretend we're perfect. He didn't say we've never fallen short. He said what we all needed to hear. That gratitude is greater than grievance, that you can criticize your country, but you should never despise it. And that citizenship isn't just a legal status, it's a posture of the heart. You either stand with your country, or you stand apart from it. And in that moment, Trump stood with it. That's not a campaign strategy. That's a moral compass. I think about the people I grew up with, steelworkers, single moms, small-town preachers, none of them perfect, but all of them proud. Not proud in a loud, arrogant way. Proud the way a man is proud of his father's name. Proud the way a mother is proud of a folded flag in a wooden box. Proud the way we used to be before we were told we should be ashamed of who we are. That pride isn't hate, it's home. And Trump, for all the chaos that surrounds him, pointed us back toward that home. Not with anger, with clarity, with conviction, with a quiet that cut deeper than the noise. I know not everyone sees it that way. Some will never forgive him for his tone, his tweets, his history. But what I saw, what millions saw, wasn't a man trying to divide. It was a man trying to define. Define what it means to belong, to remember, to stand tall when the culture says sit down. I don't know where this country is headed, but I know this. If we have any chance of healing, it won't come from hashtags or hot takes. It'll come from moments like this, where someone, anyone, is brave enough to stop yelling and start reminding that we're not enemies, we're citizens, bound not by sameness, but by sacrifice. And when that truth hits, it hits like thunder. It started with a sentence. There are people who hate this country so much, maybe they don't deserve to be citizens. That line could have ended in chaos, but it didn't. Because instead of throwing gasoline on the fire, Trump lit a torch and held it steady. And in the glow of that moment, something became clear. This was never about Rosie O'Donnell. It was about us, about what we allow, what we celebrate, what we forget, and what we remember. He didn't yell. He didn't insult. He invoked the Constitution. And for once, the country listened. Now the question is, will we forget again? Or will we carry that silence forward? Will we stop laughing when they mock the flag? Stop scrolling when they drag faith through the dirt? Stop pretending that loving your country is something to be embarrassed by? Because this isn't about Donald Trump. It's about the woman in the crowd who asked if it's too late. It's about the veteran who stood up not for himself but for his son. It's about the quiet ones, the praying ones, the working ones, the ones who built this nation but never made the headlines. This story is for them, for you. If you felt something during that speech, if you recognized the weight behind the words, then don't let it end here. Tell someone, show someone. Let them see a version of America that isn't angry or afraid, but awake. Awake to what matters. Awake to what unites us. Awake to the fact that sometimes silence is the loudest truth. And when you tell the story, tell it like this. Trump didn't yell. Trump didn't rage. Trump didn't mock. He remembered. And Rosie, for once, she went silent. That's when we knew the story had finally turned. And maybe, just maybe, so have we.